The crystal chandelier in the dining room, the one Sandra always called the heart of the home, seemed to mock me with its cold, glittering light. My name is Amy, and for 5 years I tried to feel like this place, this sprawling mansion, was my home too, but it always felt like theirs. Brett's, his mother Sandra's, his sister Skylar's. I was just living in it. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet Tuesday. Brett had been distant lately, more so than usual. He'd been spending longer hours at the office, his texts becoming shorter, almost clipped. I'd brushed it off as stress. We all have stressful periods, right? I'd even planned to make his favorite pasta, a small peace offering for the growing silence between us. I was just setting the table, the heavy silverware clinking softly against the polished mahogany, when Brett walked in. He didn't look at the table, or at me, really. His gaze was fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "We need to talk, Amy," he said, his voice flat. That tone, it always sent a shiver down my spine. It was the same tone Sandra used when she was about to point out something I'd done wrong. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Is everything all right at work?" He walked past me towards the massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. He picked up a small silver-framed photo of us from the mantelpiece, a picture from our honeymoon, smiling, windswept, genuinely happy, or so I thought. "Not really about work," he said, his back still to me. I waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the sub-zero refrigerator from the kitchen. Even the air felt heavy. "Brett?" He turned, finally. His expression was unreadable, a mask of polite indifference. "I want a divorce, Amy." Just like that. No preamble, no gentle easing into it. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the back of a dining chair, my knuckles white. "What? Why? I don't understand." "We've grown apart," he said, reciting the line as if from a script. "It's been coming for a while. I need something more." "Something more?" My voice was barely a whisper. "What does that even mean?" "Brett, we've been married for 5 years. We built a life here." A small, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. "I built a life here, Amy. You lived in it." The cruelty of that, so casual, so dismissive. It was a familiar echo of Sandra's constant reminders of my modest upbringing, of Schuyler's barely veiled sneers whenever I voiced an opinion about decor or dinner parties. They'd always seen me as an accessory, someone Brett had inexplicably picked up who didn't quite match the rest of their curated lives. But why now? So suddenly? I felt tears pricking my eyes, and I hated myself for it. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "There's no good time for this, is there?" he said, shrugging. He placed the photo frame back on the mantel, slightly askew. "I just think it's best to be direct." Direct. He called this direct. This felt like an ambush. My mind raced, trying to pinpoint a moment, a sign I'd missed. Had he been seeing someone? Was that the something more he needed? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. "Is there someone else?" I managed to ask, the words tasting like ash. He waved a dismissive hand. "That's not really relevant to this discussion. The point is, this isn't working for me anymore." He walked towards the door, pausing with his hand on the ornate brass knob. He looked back at me then, a flicker of something I couldn't name in his eyes. Pity, perhaps, or just impatience. "Don't worry, Amy," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, which somehow made it worse. "We'll make this quick. There's really nothing of yours to divide, is there?" The chandelier's light fractured, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint. Nothing of mine. After 5 years, that's what it came down to. My contribution, my love, my efforts to be part of his family all amounted to nothing in his eyes. Just like Sandra and Schuyler had always implied, the gilded cage I'd tried so hard to make a home had just slammed its door shut, with me on the wrong side of it. The echo of the front door closing reverberated through the cavernous hall. I sank into one of the plush dining chairs, the ones Sandra had picked out from an antique dealer in France. Nothing of yours to divide, is there? His words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. My pasta water was probably boiling over in the kitchen. It didn't matter. Nothing seemed to matter except the gaping hole that had just been torn through my life. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the chill of the room seeped into my bones. I walked through the silent, opulent rooms, his rooms, apparently, like a ghost. Our bedroom, his bedroom, felt alien. I slept fitfully in the guest room, a room I'd always found cold and impersonal. It seemed fitting now. The next morning, Brett was gone. A note on the kitchen island, scribbled on the back of a business card, said, "Gone to the club. Mother will be over later to discuss arrangements." Not even a sorry, just arrangements. Sandra arrived precisely at 10, Schuyler trailing behind her like a smug shadow. Sandra was dressed impeccably, of course, in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe from before I met Brett. Schuyler wore a smirk that made me want to scream. "Amy, dear," Sandra began, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she surveyed the kitchen. "Such a mess. Brett mentioned things were strained." "He asked for a divorce last night," I said, my voice flat. I was too numb for tears now. "Yes, well," Sandra sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "These things happen. Men, you know, they realize what they truly want, what truly fits." She glanced pointedly around the kitchen, then at me. "It was always a bit of an adjustment, wasn't it, for you to fit in here?" Schuyler snickered. "Understatement of the year, Mother." "Schuyler, be nice," Sandra chided, though there was no force behind it. "Amy is going through a difficult time." She turned back to me. "Now, about the arrangements. Brett feels, and I agree, that it's best you find alternative accommodation quickly, to allow everyone to move on." "Alternative accommodation?" I repeated, stunned. "You want me to leave just like that?" "Well, it is Brett's house, dear," Sandra said, as if explaining something to a child. "And frankly, your presence here would just be awkward for everyone." "Especially for Brett," Schuyler added, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "He needs space to, breathe again." My confusion was rapidly turning into a cold, hard knot of anger in my stomach. "And what about my things? What about us? Our marriage?" Sandra actually patted my arm. It was a condescending, dismissive gesture. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that. Brett is very generous. He'll ensure you have, well, whatever it is you came with. We wouldn't want you to be destitute, of course. Though, to be fair, you didn't exactly bring a fortune into this marriage, did you?" The implication was clear. I was a freeloader, a burden they were now eager to shed. I tried to reach Brett all day. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts received curt one-word replies, or worse, replies from Sandra using Brett's phone. "Brett is busy. Brett will address this through his lawyer. Brett feels it's best we handle the practicalities, Amy." It was like he'd vanished, leaving his mother and sister to do his dirty work. The cowardice of it was almost as painful as the betrayal. Later that afternoon, Sandra sat me down in the formal living room, the one reserved for important guests. Schuyler perched on the arm of a brocade sofa, looking thoroughly entertained. "Now, Amy," Sandra began, a sheaf of papers appearing as if by magic in her hand, "Brett's lawyer has drawn up a preliminary separation agreement, very straightforward. Essentially, you waive any claim to marital assets, and Brett will provide a small, one-time payment to help you get back on your feet. A gesture of goodwill, you understand. A small payment? I stared at her. After 5 years? After I gave up my job to support Brett's career, to manage this house? Manage? Schuyler scoffed. The staff manages the house, Amy. You mostly just lived here. The point is, dear, Sandra cut in smoothly, there aren't really any marital assets to speak of that concern you. The house, the investments, the businesses, they are all family assets predating your involvement. Her phone buzzed on the antique coffee table. She glanced at it, a satisfied little smile playing on her lips. Ah, that'll be Brett's lawyer now confirming his availability. He's very good, you know, especially at dealing with, well, let's just say he has a lot of experience with women who have unrealistic expectations after a short marriage. She paused, then added as if it were an afterthought, quite adept at handling potential gold diggers, if you catch my drift. Gold digger. The word slapped me across the face. They weren't just divorcing me, they were planning to utterly destroy my reputation, to paint me as some grasping opportunist. The shock was so profound I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her, the mask of civility I'd been desperately clinging to finally shattering. This wasn't a divorce, it was a declaration of war, and I was their target. The first meeting with the lawyers felt like walking into an execution. Brett was there finally, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He sat flanked by Sandra and his lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit named Mr. Harrison, who looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. I sat alone, my hands trembling in my lap. I hadn't had time to find my own lawyer yet. Everything was happening too fast. Ms. Olson? Mr. Harrison began, his voice smooth and cold as polished steel. We've reviewed the preliminary terms sent by my client. We trust you find them equitable. Equitable? They were offering me pocket money, essentially, enough to cover a few months' rent in a tiny apartment, maybe. Equitable? I found my voice, though it shook. I've been married to Brett for 5 years. This house has been my home. Sandra tissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Now, Amy, let's not be dramatic. It was Brett's home, and you were residing in it. There's a difference. Mr. Harrison nodded. Indeed, the property in question, along with significant other assets, are part of a long-standing family trust established well before your marriage to Mr. Reyes. As such, they are not considered marital property subject to division. But I contributed, I insisted, my gaze flicking to Brett, pleading with him to say something, anything. He just stared at a point on the wall behind me. I managed the household, hosted his business dinners, supported his career. With all due respect, Miss Olson, Mr. Harrison interrupted, maintaining a household, especially one with dedicated staff and attending social events, hardly constitutes a financial contribution that would entitle you to a share of pre-existing family wealth. Schuyler, who had insisted on being present, for moral support for Brett, she claimed, though her eyes gleamed with malicious delight, let out a small, derisive laugh. The humiliation was a physical ache. They sat there, so smug, so united in their disdain, detailing how I'd brought nothing to the table, how I'd benefited from their generosity, their lifestyle. You came to us with a small savings account and a few pieces of unremarkable furniture, Amy, Sandra said, her voice laced with that familiar condescension. Brett provided everything, a beautiful home, a comfortable life, things you could only have dreamed of. That was when Brett finally spoke. He leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. The one I used to think was charming but now recognized as pure arrogance. Let's be honest, Amy. You were a charity case my family regrettably took in. We tried to elevate you, but some people just can't be elevated, can they? Sandra nodded slowly, a queenly gesture of agreement. We had such hopes, but, well, charity case. The words echoed in the opulent room, bouncing off the silk-lined walls. My charity case. My cheeks burned. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I looked at Brett, at the man I had loved, the man I had shared my life with, and saw a stranger, a cruel, heartless stranger. The meeting ended shortly after. There was nothing more to say. They had made their position perfectly clear. I was to be discarded with the trash, grateful for any scraps they threw my way. I stumbled out of the lawyer's office and back to the mansion, his mansion, in a daze. The sheer unfairness of it all, the calculated cruelty, it was overwhelming. That night, alone in the cold guest room, I finally broke. The tears came, hot and furious, a torrent of grief, anger, and utter desolation. I clutched my phone, my fingers fumbling as I scrolled through my contacts. I needed to hear a friendly voice, a sane voice. I found my mom's number. Hi, Mom, I managed, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Amy, honey, how are you? Her voice was warm, familiar, a balm to my raw nerves. I'm I'm okay, I lied. Just things with Brett are a bit rough. Rough how? My mom, Robin, had a way of hearing what wasn't said. I hesitated. Then the words started to tumble out, a disjointed, tearful account of Brett's sudden demand for a divorce, the way his family was treating me, the threat of being left with nothing. I downplayed the worst of it, the charity case comment, the sheer venom. I didn't want to worry them too much. My parents, Robin and Marshall, were simple, down to earth people. They wouldn't understand this world of trusts and lawyers and casual cruelty. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then my mom's voice, quiet but firm, cut through my sobs. Amy, honey, whatever it is, tell us everything. Don't leave anything out. We might be able to help more than you think, more than I think. What could they possibly do? They lived a modest life. They couldn't fight this kind of money, this kind of power, but her tone, there was something in it, a hint of something I hadn't heard before, a thread of steel beneath the usual gentle warmth. My mom's quiet confidence over the phone was like a lifeline. The next morning I called them again, the dam of my composure finally breaking completely. I told them everything, every sneer from Schuyler, every condescending remark from Sandra, every cold, dismissive word from Brett. I told them about the lawyer, the paltry settlement offer, the accusation of being a gold digger, and then the final crushing blow, Brett calling me a charity case. I recounted how they kept emphasizing that the mansion was their legacy, their family seat, and how I had no claim to any of it. I expected gasps, outrage, maybe even tears from my mom. Instead, there was a long, thoughtful silence on the other end of the line. Then my dad, Marshall, spoke, his voice calm and steady. Amy, sweetheart, are you somewhere you can talk freely? Yes, I whispered, huddled in the guest room, the door locked. They're all out. Good, Mom said. Now listen very carefully. What we're about to tell you is going to come as a shock, but it's true, and it changes everything. I held my breath. What could possibly change the mountain of trouble I was under? That mansion, Amy, Dad began, his voice even. The one Brett and his family are so proud of, the one they call the Reyes family mansion. Yes, it's not theirs. I blinked. What do you mean it's not theirs? They've lived there for generations, they said. It's been in Brett's family forever. That's the story they like to tell. Mom cut in, a new, steely edge to her voice that I'd never heard before. The truth, honey, is that your father and I bought that property about 7 years ago as an investment. I was speechless. My parents buying a multi-million-dollar mansion? They lived in a comfortable but modest suburban house. Dad was a retired engineer, Mom a former teacher. They were comfortable, yes, but this was a different stratosphere. But how? Why didn't you ever tell me? We wanted you to make your own way, Amy, Dad explained. And frankly, we never much liked Brett's family, even from the start. We saw the way they looked down on you, on us. We saw their arrogance. When you and Brett decided to get married, Mom continued, and he was so keen on you two living in that particular house, his ancestral home, we saw an opportunity. We decided to gift it to you, Amy. Not to him, not to his family, to you. My head was spinning. Gift it to me? But all the paper, the way they talk about it? It's held in an ironclad trust fund, sweetheart, Dad said. In your name. We set it up specifically to protect you. The trust was activated upon your marriage with you as the sole beneficiary. The deed, everything is legally and unequivocally yours. It was our wedding gift to you, designed so that if something like this ever happened, and forgive us, but we had a feeling it might with that family, you would be protected. They couldn't touch it. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the phone pressed hard against my ear. My mind reeled, trying to process this monumental, earth-shattering revelation. The house. My house. So, all their talk about their legacy, their family wealth tied to this place, is just that, Amy? Talk, Mom said. Hot air. They've been living in your house, courtesy of your parents all this time, all while looking down their noses at you. A slow, burning heat started to spread through my veins, pushing aside the cold despair. It wasn't just relief, it was anger, a righteous, furious anger. They had lorded their supposed wealth over me, humiliated me, called me a charity case, all while enjoying the fruits of my own parents' quiet generosity and foresight. We've already been in touch with a property manager, a Mr. Jensen, Dad said. He's very discreet, very professional. He's on standby. I looked around the opulent guest room at the expensive wallpaper, the antique furniture. It all looked different now. It wasn't a symbol of their wealth and my insignificance. It was mine, every last stick of it. A small, almost feral smile touched my lips. I thought of Sandra's smug pronouncements, Schuyler's sneering laughter, Brett's cruel dismissal. I pictured their faces, so confident in their superiority, so sure of their power. I picked up a small framed photo from the bedside table. It was a candid shot from one of Sandra's pretentious garden parties. Brett, Sandra, and Schuyler, all looking insufferably pleased with themselves, standing on the grand terrace. My terrace. They have no idea what's coming, I whispered, the words of vow. The charity case is about to become their worst nightmare. The next meeting with Mr. Harrison, Brett's shark of a lawyer, was a week later. This time I wasn't alone. My parents had insisted on hiring a lawyer for me, a sharp, empathetic woman named Quinn Martin. Walking into that sterile conference room with Quinn by my side felt different. The despair that had clung to me like a shroud was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering resolve. Brett, Sandra, and Schuyler were already there, arranged on one side of the polished table like a tribunal. They looked surprised to see Quinn, then exchanged knowing glances, probably assuming my simple parents had scraped together their savings for some small-town lawyer. Miss Olson, Mr. Harrison began, his tone still reeking of condescension, and to counsel. We trust you've had time to consider our client's very generous offer. We have, Quinn said, her voice calm and professional. She opened her briefcase and took out a slim folder. And we find it lacking. Sandra scoffed. Lacking? My dear girl, it's more than she deserves. I met Sandra's gaze, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. It was the first time I hadn't flinched under her scrutiny. I saw a flicker of surprise, then annoyance in her eyes. Good. Perhaps we have a different understanding of what Ms. Olson is entitled to, Quinn said smoothly. The meeting droned on, with Mr. Harrison reiterating their position. I was entitled to nothing but their goodwill. I let Quinn handle most of the talking, content to observe. And, oh, how I observed. I watched Brett fidget, avoiding my gaze, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He looked less like a confident tycoon and more like a petulant child caught in a lie. I saw Sandra's carefully constructed composure, the way her fingers tightened on her pen whenever Quinn countered one of Mr. Harrison's points. I saw Schuyler, bored and impatient, scrolling through her phone, occasionally rolling her eyes. They were so blissfully, arrogantly unaware. They preened and postured, talking about their assets, their home, their generosity. Every word was a fresh log on the fire of my anger. The fact remains, Mr. Harrison said, leaning back in his chair with an air of finality, that the primary residence is a family asset, held in trust, and Miss Olson has no claim to it whatsoever. Quinn smiled, a polite professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We'll be addressing the matter of the residence in due course, Mr. Harrison. For now, let's just say we have a different perspective on its ownership. That seemed to unsettle them. Brett frowned. Sandra's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. What does that mean? Different perspective, she demanded. It means, I said, speaking up for the first time, my voice surprisingly steady, that perhaps not everything is as it appears. They stared at me. I held their gaze, letting my newfound confidence radiate. It was a strange feeling, like wearing a new suit of armor. The days that followed were a peculiar dance. I continued to live in the guest room, a silent observer in what they still considered their domain. I listened to their casual cruelty, their entitled pronouncements with a new, chilling clarity. Sandra would swan through the hallways, issuing orders to the staff about redecorating plans. Once Amy is no longer underfoot, Schuyler would openly discuss parties she planned to host to celebrate Brett's newfound freedom. Brett himself remained distant, communicating mostly through imperious glares or passive-aggressive comments relayed by his mother. I played along. I was polite, almost serene. When Sandra mentioned needing to air out Amy's old room to get rid of any lingering, well, she didn't finish the sentence, but her disdain was clear. I just smiled. Quinn and I, along with my parents and Mr. Jensen, the property manager, were meticulously preparing. Documents were being gathered, strategies refined. The presentation, as my dad called it, was taking shape. One evening I was in the kitchen making myself a cup of tea when Sandra swept in. Amy, dear, she said, that saccharine tone that always set my teeth on edge, I do hope you're making practical arrangements. We wouldn't want you to be inconvenienced when the time comes. Oh, I'm making arrangements, Sandra, I replied, stirring my tea slowly. Good. She nodded, satisfied. Because once the divorce is finalized and you're gone, we're thinking of completely redoing your old bedroom. Perhaps a home gym for Brett or a larger closet for Schuyler. I looked at her directly into her cold, assessing eyes. A genuine smile touched my lips this time, a smile that held no warmth, only a chilling promise. Oh, I wouldn't make any permanent plans just yet, Sandra. Her own smile faltered. A flicker of unease crossed her face before she quickly masked it. Don't be delusional, child. The outcome is inevitable. Is it? I said softly, taking a sip of my tea. We'll see. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned on her heel and swept out, her posture a little stiffer than before. I knew my quiet confidence was unnerving them. They couldn't understand it. They still thought they held all the cards. They had no idea the game was about to change entirely. My newfound poise, the quiet way I met their gazes instead of wilting, clearly rattled them. They couldn't reconcile it with the charity case they'd decided I was. Sandra started watching me with a narrowed, suspicious gaze. Schuyler's sneers became a little more forced, a little less confident. Brett, well, Brett mostly just looked confused, which was a small satisfaction in itself. They decided in their infinite arrogance that my calm demeanor was a sign of desperation, or perhaps delusion. They probably figured I was clinging to some pathetic hope that Brett would change his mind. So they decided to escalate. "We need to finalize this, Amy," Brett announced one evening, cornering me in the hallway. He had that familiar impatient look on his face. "This dragging on is unseemly." "I agree," I said, my voice even. He looked surprised I hadn't argued. "Good. So Harrison suggested one final meeting, here, at the house, to go over the settlement one last time and get your signature." At the house, of course. They wanted to stage this final humiliation in their castle, to rub my nose in what I was supposedly losing. The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. "Here?" I asked, feigning a mild surprise. "Yes," Sandra interjected, gliding out from the living room like a galleon in full sail. "It's best we do this on familiar ground. Less intimidating for you, perhaps. We want you to feel comfortable when you sign." Comfortable. Right. Like a lamb being led to slaughter. Schuyler appeared behind her mother, a smirk plastered on her face. "Yeah, Amy, we can even have your favorite tea ready. What was it again? Something herbal and bland?" The condescension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They genuinely believed they were on the verge of a total victory, that one more display of their wealth and power would make me crumble and accept their insulting offer. "All right," I said, after a moment's pause. "A meeting here sounds fine." Their surprise was palpable. I think they expected me to object, to cry, to plead. My easy agreement seemed to throw them off. "Excellent," Brett said, recovering quickly. "Next Tuesday, then, 10 a.m., Harrison will be here." He even managed a magnanimous little smile. "And Amy, try to be realistic. This is the best you're going to get." The days leading up to the presentation were filled with a strange electric tension. I continued my routine, a quiet ghost in their opulent world. I heard snippets of their conversations, Sandra on the phone with decorators, Schuyler boasting to a friend about the fabulous clear-out they were about to have. Brett, I noticed, was on his phone a lot, hushed conversations, sometimes a secretive smile on his face. Once I overheard him mention a name, Alina. "She'll love the space once it's refreshed," he'd said into his phone, his voice smooth and suggestive. So there was someone else. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He wasn't just divorcing me, he was clearing the decks for his next acquisition. Tuesday morning arrived crisp and clear. I dressed carefully, not in anything flashy, but in a simple, well-cut dress that made me feel strong. I ate a light breakfast, my stomach a knot of anticipation rather than nerves. At precisely 10 a.m., Mr. Harrison arrived, his briefcase bulging with papers. Brett, Sandra, and Schuyler were assembled in the grand drawing room, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured lawns. They looked like a royal family holding court. Sandra gestured towards a delicate, uncomfortable-looking antique chair. "Do sit down, Amy. Let's get this over with." I sat, Quinn Martin's reassuring presence in my mind, though she wouldn't be here for this part. This was a family matter, after all, or so they thought. Brett cleared his throat, taken center stage. He had a document in his hand, their generous offer. "So, Amy, as we've discussed, this is the final settlement. We're prepared to offer you a one-time payment of—" He named a sum that was frankly insulting, barely enough to cover moving expenses and a security deposit on a modest apartment. in exchange for your full and final waiver of any and all claims against myself or the family estate." He looked at me, expecting what? Gratitude? Tears? "This allows you to walk away with your personal belongings, of course," he continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity, "and to start fresh. It's more than fair, Amy. It's generous." Sandra nodded in solemn agreement. Schuyler examined her nails, a bored expression on her face. I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring the smug certainty on their faces. Then the doorbell rang, a clear, authoritative chime that echoed through the cavernous hall. Brett frowned. "Are we expecting anyone else?" Sandra looked irritated. "The staff knows not to disturb us." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. "That must be my parents," I said, my voice clear and steady, "and their associate." The housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, her face a mask of confusion, opened the grand front door. My parents, Robin and Marshall, stepped inside, but not as the Reyes family knew them. Gone were their usual comfortable, unassuming clothes. My mom, Robin, wore a sharply tailored pantsuit, her demeanor calm and authoritative. My dad, Marshall, was in a smart blazer, looking more like a CEO than a retired engineer, and with them was a tall, stern-looking man in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase, Mr. Maximilian Jensen, the property manager. They didn't arrive in their sensible sedan. A sleek black town car was visible in the driveway behind them. Brett, Sandra, and Schuyler stared, momentarily speechless. "Mom, Dad," I said, standing up, "and Mr. Jensen, please come in." Sandra recovered first, her voice tight with annoyance. "Amy, what is the meaning of this? This is a private legal meeting." "Actually, Sandra," my mom said, her voice polite but firm as she stepped further into the drawing room, Mr. Jensen at her side, "we have a vested interest in this discussion, particularly concerning this property." Brett scoffed. "A vested interest? With all due respect, Mrs. Olson, this house has been in my family for generations." "Yes, we've heard that story," my dad interrupted, his tone surprisingly steely. He looked directly at Brett. "It's a good story, but it's not true." Mr. Jensen stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He extracted a thick document bound in blue. "Mr. Reyes, Mrs. Reyes, Ms. Reyes," he began, his voice devoid of any emotion. "My name is Maximilian Jensen. I am a property manager retained by Mr. and Mrs. Olson." He placed the document on the ornate coffee table. "This is the original deed to this property, along with the associated trust documentation." A stunned silence filled the room. Brett's face, which had been flushed with indignation, began to pale. Sandra's mouth opened slightly. Schuyler actually lowered her phone. "The property at this address," Mr. Jensen continued, "was purchased approximately 7 years ago by Marshall and Robin Olson. Upon the marriage of their daughter, Amy Olson, to Brett Reyes, the full ownership of this property was transferred into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust is Amy Olson." He let that sink in. The air crackled. You could hear a pin drop. "The trust, I should add," Mr. Jensen said, his gaze sweeping over their dumbstruck faces, "was specifically structured to be impenetrable to marital claims. It was a wedding gift from Amy's parents to Amy." Brett stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. His complexion was now ashen. This is impossible. This is our family home." "It was never your family home, Brett," I said, my voice clear and strong, finally free of any tremor. "It was always mine, a gift from my parents who, unlike some, actually value and protect their children." Sandra sputtered, "But the upkeep, the taxes, we've paid." "You've paid rent, essentially," my mom said calmly, "though you didn't know it. We ensured the trust covered all major expenses quietly. You were, in effect, tenants. Tenants who, I must say, have been remarkably discourteous to the owner. Mr. Jensen then produced 3 more documents from his briefcase. He handed one to Brett, one to Sandra, and one to Schuyler. These are official eviction notices, he stated. As the legal representative of the property owner, Amy Olson, I am serving you notice to vacate these premises within 30 days. The shock on their faces was monumental. It was everything I had imagined and more. Sandra's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the sudden sagging of her features. Schuyler looked like she'd seen a ghost. Brett just stared, his mouth agape, the generous settlement offer falling from his limp fingers to the expensive Persian rug. You can't, Sandra finally shrieked, her voice cracking. This is an outrage, a trick. It's no trick, Sandra, I said, stepping forward. The anger I had suppressed for so long finally surged, cold and cleansing. It's the truth. Something your family seems to have a very loose relationship with. For 5 years I endured your condescension, your snide remarks, your constant reminders of how I didn't belong, how I brought nothing to this marriage. I turned to Brett. You called me a charity case, Brett. A charity case your family regrettably took in. Well, guess what? The charity case owns the roof over your head. The charity case is kicking you out. He flinched as if I'd struck him. He started to stammer, but Alina, I told her, we were going to. Alina? I asked, a humorless smile on my face. Is that the something more you needed? Did you promise her my house, Brett? Did you promise her a life built on lies? If Alina was expecting a grand mansion, she was in for a rude awakening just like him. He looked utterly defeated, the image of the powerful, arrogant man shattered into a million pieces. Sandra lunged forward, her face contorted with fury. You ungrateful little witch! After everything we've done for you! Done for me? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You tried to strip me of my dignity, my savings, my self-respect. You plotted to leave me with nothing. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze unflinching. It never was your home, Sandra. My voice dropped, cold and final. And now I want you out of my house. The 30 days that followed were a delicious slow-motion train wreck for the Reyes family, and I had a front row seat. Sandra shrieked and threatened lawsuits daily. Mr. Harrison, Brett's lawyer, made a few blustering calls to Quinn, but Quinn, armed with the irrefutable truth of the trust, shut him down with cool professionalism. There was no legal loophole, no escape. The Reyes family mansion was mine, lock, stock, and barrel. The news, of course, rippled through their social circle like a shock wave. I didn't have to lift a finger. Their own penchant for gossip did the work. Whispers of their downfall, their eviction from the ancestral home, became the talk of the tennis club and the charity galas Sandra frequented. I heard from a gleeful acquaintance that a local society columnist, one Sandra had always courted, was having a field day with the Reyes reversal of fortune. Apparently, Brett was also in significant personal debt, having leveraged the perception of owning the mansion for various ill-advised ventures. The humiliation was public and profound. Watching them pack was an exercise in karmic satisfaction. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a sullen, resentful compliance. Schuyler, stripped of her designer backdrop, looked surprisingly ordinary, even a little lost, as she argued with movers over boxes of her clothes. Sandra directed the packing of her precious antiques with a face like thunder, occasionally shooting venomous glares my way. I just smiled serenely and offered them bottled water. Brett attempted one last desperate maneuver. He found me in the garden where I was discussing new rose bushes with a landscaper my mom recommended. Amy, he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, almost pleading, can we talk? Just for a minute? I turned, my expression neutral. What is there to talk about, Brett? I I made a mistake, he stammered, running a hand through his usually perfect hair, which now looked disheveled. A terrible mistake. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. This whole thing, it's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I raised an eyebrow. Calling me a charity case, trying to kick me out with nothing, planning to move your new girlfriend into my house. Those were misunderstandings? His face flushed. Elena is, that's not important. What's important is us, Amy. We had something good. Maybe, maybe we can fix this. He actually reached for my hand. I pulled away as if he were diseased. Fix this? Brett, you didn't just break a plate. You systematically tried to destroy me, to humiliate me, to erase 5 years of my life as if I were nothing. There's nothing to fix. But I love you, he whispered, his eyes wide and for the first time looking genuinely desperate. The words once so precious now sounded hollow, pathetic. No, Brett, I said, my voice cold as ice. You loved the idea of me, the convenient, unassuming wife who wouldn't challenge your ego. You loved what you thought I represented, someone you could control. You never loved me. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, defeated. There was nothing left to say. He turned and walked away, a shadow of the arrogant man who had so coldly dismissed me just weeks before. The day they finally left was glorious. The last moving van pulled away and a profound silence settled over the house. My house. I walked through the rooms, no longer seeing ghosts of their condescension, but possibilities. My parents were there, along with Quinn, and we opened a bottle of champagne, a good one, not the cheap stuff Sandra used to serve me. To new beginnings, my dad toasted, his eyes twinkling. And to smart parents, Quinn added, smiling at them. Mom just hugged me tight. We're so proud of you, honey. You handled this with strength and grace. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of purging and reclaiming. I hired cleaners to scrub away every trace of their presence. I donated their unwanted furniture, the pieces they couldn't cram into whatever smaller, less grand accommodation they'd found, to charity. I started redecorating room by room, replacing their cold, formal style with warmth, with color, with me. The oppressive weight of their judgment was lifting, replaced by a sense of freedom and lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The pain of Brett's betrayal was real, and the scars would take time to fade. But standing on my porch, the late afternoon sun warming my face as I looked out over the sprawling lawns, my lawns, I felt a profound sense of peace. They had tried to define me by their standards, to diminish me, to break me. They had called me a nobody, a charity case. But in the end, they were just tenants in my life, their arrogance, their undoing, their cruelty, their legacy. Their lease was up, and I, Amy Olson, am the owner.